I have, of course, been in Holland since I last left St. Louis Chess Club in December, and Holland was cold. I'm telling you, the month of March, I think they rewrote all the record books since weather was kept. But as cold as it was in Holland, one of the hottest things that was happening in the world of chess was the candidates tournament. Did you all manage to follow some of those games and you know what was going on? Vladimir Kramnik and Magnus Carlsen, and I must say it captured me. And the game that I selected tonight was a game that Vladimir Kramnik is black. He was one of the tournament leaders, as you know, Vasily Ivanchuk white. Okay, so we have to kind of put the settings in proper order. Vladimir Kramnik is tied for first at +4 with his closest rival, Magnus Carlsen, also at +4. If the two players make a draw, Magnus Carlsen has the higher tiebreaks. So Vladimir Kramnik enters this round from the perspective he's got to pull out all the stops and he's got to win, because Magnus will play white against Peter's fiddler. Vladimir is not expecting that Magnus with white is going to take too many risks and lose the game. And if Magnus does make a draw and Vladimir Kramnik, only draws with the black pieces, well, Magnus becomes the challenger. So Vladimir really feels that he has to win. And at the same time, he's thinking to himself, well, if I'm going all out for the win over here, maybe it will impact Magnus to try to win himself. So that's another reason for me playing very risky. Vladimir's opponent is a very mercurial Vasily Ivanchuk. I mean, Ivanchuk can beat anybody on any given day, world champion or not. Equally, Vasily could blow up. One of the weirdest things that happened in this candidates tournament, I mean, I was just overwhelmed. 5 games lost on time. How do you do that? You know, like, move, you know, move. So, you know, from Kramnik's point of view, Vasily is having a bad tournament and he's vulnerable. Okay, so Ivanchuk opens up with d4. Hold on, do I have the right? Yes. d6, e4, knight f6, knight c3, g6. And we have the Pirc defense. Well, as your good luck turns out to be, I happen to be a Pirc defense player. I played the Pirc my whole life. In fact, in the Northwest, we used to call it the rat. The rat. We liked the rat. And I was influenced very much by the games of Grandmaster Duncan Suttles, who was a Grandmaster from Canada who lives in Vancouver, BC. And I very much like Black's defense. So I played the Pirc, the rat, much of my career. One of the things is that it's a very flexible system, unfortunately flexible for both sides. White has a vast array of meeting the Pirc defense. To my mind, one of the most dangerous lines is the so-called Austrian attack with f4, with a very straight idea of just developing behind, you know, knight f3, bishop d3 castles, and developing behind this broad array of pawns in the center, also, of course, with the idea of e5. Many opponents have played different moves against me. I recall one opponent, Vlado Kovacevic. He played against me bishop e2, the variation, bishop g7, and a completely different type of attack, g4. You know, g5, get it going, you know, off you go. And that was a fun game. I've had other players play against me a more flexible system, which was bishop e3, bishop g7, queen d2. The idea from White's point of view with this setup is obviously it's very clear he's preparing to castle long, and at the same time White thinks that he could neutralize this bishop on g7 with a quick bishop h6. And White's idea is if he provokes black to play knight g4, then after bishop h5, and after, for example, a line like h6, bishop h4, g5, it's very funny, like in this kind of a setup, it's more often that you might see the move knight f6 to h5 in order to capture the bishop. Now that your knight's on g4, it's not bothering anybody, and the next move will be a move like f3 and just chase it back. So, and in the meantime, black has weakened his kingside structure. There are many, many, many ways for White to play against the Pirc defense, which is one of the reasons I ended up abandoning it myself, was because I just got tired of dealing with a wide variety of formations that White could choose. As it turns out, Ivanchuk chose what is called the classical variation of the Pirc, or what is more appropriately the Geller variation. Knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2. It's also, this setup for White is also called the quiet system. So the idea of the quiet system is just as it sounds. White isn't making any great pretensions of blowing black away with some vigorous attack. Rather, he's simply saying, okay, I'm just developing, what are you doing? Now again, from Vladimir's point of view, there are many ways for black to equalize. A very standard move here is a move like bishop g4, e5 comes into mind. I liked, as black in this system, I like to play the move c7, c6, which is a kind of a flexible move, asking White what he wants to do. And in time, I often played the move also c6 with the idea of b5. And after, for example, a4, to stop the move b5, a move like knight d7, and in case of, for example, a move like bishop f4, I want to play as black the move e7, e5, and I like this idea of queen a5 supporting e5 and playing for e5, and I think black is just fine. In my younger days, I also played a6, h3, and this move knight c6. I had tried this against Grandmaster Larry Christensen, and in this particular, I actually did it a move earlier. I had played knight c6 against Larry and others, and new variation. And the idea is that after the move d5, what do you think black should play? What do you think black should play? Knight, if you, I made a mistake of playing knight to e5, and after the trade, the swap, I never really got a very good kingside attack going. I ended up playing moves like knight d8, f5, and knight d6. But actually, against Patrick Wolf and other grandmasters, I played knight b8, which is very cool. Essentially, what I've said is I've just provoked you to advance your pawns, and if you do a move like h3, I'll play c6, and if you do a move, for example, like bishop e3, I'll play knight bd7, and in some cases, my idea might be to play knight c5 and go after this pawn on e4. Okay, so all of this is kind of, it goes to show the extraordinary flexibility of the position. But a6 I liked, h3. Now I'm not 100% sure about this move knight c6. With this move h3, basically what White is saying is, please, I want you to play the move b5. Question to my audience, why didn't he play b5? I mean, isn't the intention of the move a6 to play b5? Now with the move b5, you got this tremendous threat of b4, knight takes e4, and get yourself all excited. So what is wrong with the move b5? e5. And what happens, for example, after d takes e5? Don't all shout out at once. In truth, white has two favorable captures. First of all, after the move pawn takes e5, knight d7, attacking the pawn on e5. e6 is a very standard and very powerful idea for white. White sacrifices a pawn and threatens to recapture the pawn on e6 and threatens bishop f3. Equally good for white is that in this move, in this position after e5 takes, also a very good capture is knight takes e5 with just the very simple idea of, like, you've weakened this long diagonal. I want to play bishop here to f3 and to try to conquer this square in some way. So this too is a very favorable position for white. And that was why Vladimir went for knight c6. Now, bishop came to g5, b5, a3, h6, bishop here. And we get to what I think is the first extremely critical position of the game. On the surface, nothing special seems to be happening, but dig a little bit deeper and very important things have happened. First of all, on the queen side, this advance of a6 and b5, which provoked this response a3, is very favorable for black. This is very, very nice for black, like you see it in a lot of Sicilians, right? Where a6, b5 is played, and whenever, boy, that was shaky. I think air conditioning or something. When white is provoked to playing a3, black is very happy because this advanced pawn on b5 controls some important squares, and you're not really afraid about the move a4 undermining the queen side, because that will cost white a tempo. So that's the first thing that's happening, and that's very favorable for black. The second thing that's happened is we all understand the classical pawn center and the strengths of the we like holding the classical pawn center. But in some ways, what you're doing when you have the classical pawn center is you're controlling these center squares. Very good. You're occupying the center, and your pieces behind the advanced center can be nicely developed. Yay. So that's why we like having the pawns in the center. But on the other hand, these two bishops aren't very effective on e3 and e2. So even though you have your advanced pawn center and your pieces are sitting behind the pawns, in reality, these pieces are not very effective. And one of the reasons why they're not very effective is because black's setup is actually quite flexible. There's a very important understanding of pawn structures and the flexible pawn structure. So this is actually a crucial position. How many of you think that white is better? How many of you think the position's roughly speaking even? Okay. How many of you prefer black? No? Okay. I actually happen to like black in this position. And I would always play this position. If my opponents agreed before the game and we get this position, I would think that black has improved his position from move 1. Why? Let's suggest in the game Vladimir played e5, and I would give this move a question mark, as in a nearly decisive error. Whoa, that's strong words, right? A nearly decisive error. One of the things, as we look at the position just kind of briefly for a second, is we have to say that in a kind of a teensy-weensy little bit of a way, White's development, he's ahead in development, and his development's a little superior. When you're behind in development, you never open the position. Full stop. You just never open the position. So before you open the position, make sure that you are properly developed. So let me play a game with my audience for a moment. And here, what I would have strongly recommended and what I would have played is the move e7, e6. Why would I play this move? Well, in a sense, what I'm doing is I'm blocking White's path. I'm, you know, like when he moves his pawns forwards, I can move my pieces out of the way. With the move e7, e6, I'm saying to you, White player, what are you doing? In my mind's eye, if you give me 2, 3 moves with black, I'm going to play my bishop on b7. So I'm on the long diagonal, which will make my bishop more effective than yours. I'm going to play bishop b7. I'll tell you, I'll kind of give you I'll show my cards. I'm going to play bishop b7, and my next move after that is I'm going to play knight on c6 to e7, and I'm going to attack your pawn. Now, I would love for you to advance your center. For example, this would probably be a big mistake on your part. After e5, d takes e5, let's just say d takes e5, just so I can make my point. Well, you've just pushed your pawn right into the teeth of my defense. My intention is to capture your pawn. So let's say instead you picked up what you might consider a very nice tempo. What could be sweeter than developing your pieces with gain of time? So you play queen d2, you attack my pawn on h6, which is similar to the game, by the way, not exactly what happened in the game. Vladimir plays king h7. So more or less this is a starting position after what I'm suggesting was a very good move by black, which is e6. Now how, just toss out some moves from my audience, how would you play if you were white? Would you develop your rook? Yay. Would you advance your pawns? Maybe not. What moves do you like for white?
Reposition the Knight.
Very good. So now what the gentleman has just suggested was to reposition the knight on f3, which is a very interesting point. He makes a very, very deep observation. With these pawns in the center, it's not enough. One idea from White's point of view would be to go knight h2 followed by f4 to bring out a greater tension in the center, right? To bring more fire force in the center. But then I could transpose into what Vladimir did, and I provoked your knight away from the center. So we're going to see the game in a moment, but I'm saying the move knight h2 is very good. If you do nothing, if you just do a kind of a rote kind of development, if you played rook on a1 to d1, let's say bishop b7, and really if you look at the classical textbooks, the so-called Fred Reinfeldt School of Chess, you know, all of White's pieces are in the center, yay. But how effective, and all of Black's pieces seem to be on the flanks, strengthening on the flanks. But how effective are white's pieces. For example, after the move knight e7, well, you've opened up this bishop. If the pawn advances to e5, well, now you control the d5 square. If you play a move like bishop d3, okay, you're kind of taking the defensive, right? If you advance the pawn to d5, that will cost you a pawn. If you advance the pawn to e5, again, I'm just going to take the square. This is a very flexible situation for Kramnik, and it's the ideal that he was wanting. He wants to give Ivanchuk an opportunity to think, to go into a deep, deep, deep think and lose on time. And also what Kramnik really wants is to lengthen the game and to play a long, long game, and hopefully to keep his chances for victory alive. Okay? So in my opinion, this was the first critical position of the game, and Vladimir, I don't want to say blunder, but makes an egregious error with this move e5, because white's now ready to, with his superior, slightly superior development, is ready for battle. Okay? And the following sequence that the players played is nearly forced. First of all, again, when we're ahead in development, what we should be trying to do is get a fixed structure. Because when in a fixed structure, first of all, it's very easy for us to imagine that what it is that we would like to do. So fixing the structure right away is to white's advantage. Secondly, what's really a problem is if we look at this position. Remember how I said the pawns on a6 and b5 are a big advantage in black's favor, right? And it's true. But that pawn on b5 has a small drawback. What's the drawback of the pawn on b5? Yes, that's exactly right. After you've played the move b5, you lose a little bit of control over the square c5, but on the other hand, you say, that's not a problem because my pawn on d6 defends the c5 square. Oops. After e5 takes, there's no defense of the pawn on the square c5. Now the c5 square is almost like a magnet for white's pieces. White could easily imagine, for example, transferring the knight to c5 via a route like knight d2, knight b3, knight c5. Of course, in that case, I would occupy d4. But as Vasily points out, demonstrates clearly, after the move queen c1 with the tempo against h6, king here, bishop c5, attacking the rook. Vladimir makes a second mistake. His first mistake was e5. His second mistake comes now. So with the move bishop c5 attacking this rook on f8, the rook's got to move. Vladimir played rook e8 and falls into a nightmarish position, a very bad position. So the problem, as we'll find out in a moment, is, well, why is the move rook e8 bad? Well, in truth, the rook actually occupies a square that the queen needs. Vladimir had to play the move rook g8. Okay? So after the move rook g8, if we follow the game for just a moment, rook d1 was the move that Ivanchuk played as white. Now, with the rook on e8, the queen, of course, is trapped, and Vladimir had to walk into a self-pin. The bishop had to come to d7. Here he has the opportunity of playing queen e8. Oops, well, that wasn't the opportunity. Queen e8. Okay, so now why is this very, very different from the game? Well, in the game, Vladimir got his pieces all kind of pinned up and cramped. I still prefer white's position, but at least in my mind's eye, from black's point of view, what black would like to do is he would like to position his bishop on the long diagonal, bishop to b7, and maybe one day play knight to d4, have a lot of trades on the d4 square, and then play knight takes e4. The rook on g8 is stupid. No, it's just stupid. We agree. There's no question. It's a stupid rook. But on the other hand, the rook on e8 is just as equally stupid. And at some moment, after I play bishop b7, I may also consider ideas of queen e6 and just simply playing rook to d8. In other words, even though the rook on g8 is offsides, it's a temporary. Let's see what happened in the game. Oops. Bishop c5, rook e8, rook d1, bishop d7. And now we get the feeling, or now we start to understand that actually black's position is in deep doo-doo. This is a big square. This is control of the big square, bishop c5. White's rook is already on the open file, open d file. The bishop is in a pin. From white's point of view, if it was white to move, white could play a move like queen e3. Everything is harmonious. There's going to be no attack against the h3 pawn because the bishop could drop back. And in the meantime, after a move like queen e3, you got to start to worry about a4, b4, and knight d5, and all of white's pieces just flow. It's all good for white. Vladimir's in trouble. This move b4, it wasn't my first, I didn't think this move was bad. I didn't think it was the best move. Actually, in my opinion, the best move was a very straightforward move, and that was queen e3. And in case, for example, the game position, it's kind of transpositional. After queen c8, black has to start to worry about a move like a4, b4, knight d5. Now keep in mind, in this type of a position, there are never any sacrifices here. Bishop takes h3, g takes h3, queen takes h3, walks into the discovered check, knight g5 check, and I take your queen. Thank you for coming. Please sign my score sheet. And as we can see, white's forces are better geared, are more directed into the center. And by the way, if white does get his chance, he can now continue with the idea of bishop c4, and then all of his forces are working in harmony. And black's army is just, where's the harmony? Okay, but I really did understand this move b4. The idea behind the move b4 is as straightforward as it looks. White wants to play a4, create a weakness on the queen side, but to deny black the opportunity of playing b5, b4. Okay? So everything's kind of going nicely. Queen c8, queen e3. Probably play very quickly. No bishop takes h3 sacrifices. That's it. That's already dealt with. And now Vladimir doesn't have an active plan. I mean, what can Vladimir do with his pieces? It's never a good idea to jump into the center. Knight d4, knight takes d4, e takes d4, rook takes d4, or bishop takes d4. I take a pawn for free. What do you got? You know, you just blundered a pawn. If black moves his light squared bishop to, say, the e6 square, well, how are you going to deal with a4, creating a queenside weakness? Julian? Yes, exactly. So one of this is a very standard idea from black's point of view, is to play knight h5 and knight f4, which in fact Vladimir did. He did it at a later date. But let's analyze just briefly an idea like knight h5. Okay, so if I'm white, I'm really happy that you're going to the side of the board, right? Like, just keep going. Like, go as far as you like to the side of the board. You play on the wing, I play through the center. I've got two ideas. The first idea is I still like this move A4 a lot. If you take it, okay, if you take on A4, I win control of the square C4. Also in my mind's eye, I'm thinking that you may play your knight here, again with ideas of sacrificing over here. My intention is to meet the move knight F4 with the move bishop F1, defending. I'm going to kick your knight away. So then, if I'm playing A4 with the intention of damaging your pawn structure and winning the square C4 for my bishop, well, if I want to meet knight F4 with bishop F1, maybe I don't need the move A4. I like the move A4, but even a more interesting idea, I think, from White's point of view, is how are you going to meet the move knight D5? Again, you play on the king side, I play through the center. Let's suggest that Julian's intention was knight F4. A reasonable idea. And let's suggest that I'm a greedy guy and I want to win a pawn. Hey, I want a pawn. What are you going to do about it?
I want to take your rook.
Yes, bravo. There's somebody who's alert. I want to take your rook. Exactly. You take my rook. Yay. Anybody guess what I'd like to do? Remember, I'm an old pawn grubber, so I'm going to give you a heads up.
Queen takes F7.
Yeah, you bet. Queen takes F7. Oh, by the way, check. Excellent move. Anybody suggesting what I would like to do?
Rook takes.
Rook takes D. You bet. Give me that rook. Give me that bishop. So now, exactly in this position, I have two pawns and a bishop for an exchange. But that's not all. Your king is seriously under siege if you defend the bishop on G7 with the move rook G8. Did you guys ever hear me say about rook G8? You know, like, you could have been a tempo ahead, you know, if you had played rook G8 instead of rook E8. If you play now the move rook G8, you've got a real issue after rook takes C7. Attacking your queen, attacking your knight, winning a third pawn for the exchange. Basically, black is being brutalized, right? So after the move knight D5, you are not playing the move knight F4. And instead of playing A4, I start to conceive another idea. I start to conceive that maybe I should play C4, and after you change, I'm going to take with a bishop. And then again, you see this harmony. All of White's pieces are going through the center. This bishop is good. This bishop is okay. This bishop is basically, well, it's one-dimensional. This knight is not really working. This knight is kind of being dominated for the moment by this knight on D5. So Vladimir, already in some trouble, really found his only move. He played knight D8. Okay. And I always explain this to people. My opponent's pieces are going back. I'm happy. Like, yeah, you can go back as far as you like. You know, if you want to put them on the 9th rank, that'll suit me just fine. So black finds literally the only chance in the position with this redeployment. Now, just because my opponent's pieces are going back, I shouldn't be overly happy. At least we can conceive for black that if he is able to bring his knight to E6, he could then bring it to F4, as Julian would like. And then, you know, there are some real tempting sacrifices over here. So White has to play accurately. He launches A4. B takes A4. Knight takes A4. Knight E6. Bishop C4. So there's been a kind of a flow. So far, so good. Knight F5. Well, knight H5. Of course, one problem from black's point of view is if you bring your knight here to the f4 square, thanks to this bishop being on c4, you have to worry about bishop takes f7. So, okay, so bishop c4, knight f5. And it was very interesting to hear the players interviewed after the game. At this moment, Vladimir felt his position was okay, and it was this moment that I really didn't like his position at all. It was like, wow, you know, like what? I mean, I respect Vladimir. He's an extraordinarily deep player, but I really thought that white is for choice. Knight c3, very, very standard move. Now that black's queenside structure is split, this knight has done its job. This pawn on a6 is weak, and the knight is floating back to the center. Knight f4, knight d5, bishop b5, and bishop b3. Just a second, I think there was this moment. How many of you have seen the game between Anatoly Karpov and, I forgot his first name, Unzicker? Unzicker. This was a very famous game in the Ruy Lopez. And Nigel Short, he likes to talk about this game, and he says that his favorite move is from the game between Karpov and Unzicker. And Karpov made a move that was very, very celebrated around the world. And anybody familiar with that game? It's okay to say no. That's all right. Good, 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 good. It's even better that you don't know the move. So what moves, if you were white, would you conceive of in this position? Yes, sir. Excellent move. That's an excellent move. You bring your knight to the center. Again, what did Vladimir play? Knight here, knight here. He did play knight to d5. So you play like Vladimir Kramnik. What can you say? You know, some guys have it. But that's not Karpov's move. So besides the move knight d5, which is a magnet, of course, what else could white play? Alex?
Bishop takes a6.
Bishop takes a6. So bishop takes a6. Why doesn't this lose something?
Go for removing the cover there.
Well, let's see. Yeah, well, Alex is a chess coach, chess trainer, so he will explain all about removing the defender. So bishop takes a6, rook takes a6, rook takes a6. What? What? Well, tell me. Knight takes c5.
That might hurt.
So bishop takes h3. Ideas like bishop takes g2, queen g4. Most likely Vasily Ivanchuk wanted to avoid this, yeah? But power to you, Alex, because you're on the right track. You would like, in the beautiful fantasy land, if you take away this black rook, just take it off the board. The move bishop takes a6 is a killer because the queen defends the bishop on d7 and the whole game just collapses. Well, the famous game was between Karpov and Unzicker was that it was a Ruy Lopez and the A file was open. So white had a rook on a1 and black had a rook on a8. And what white did was white played the move bishop, Karpov played the move bishop on e3 to a7. And what Karpov's idea was that he could then follow it up with rook a5, rook a1, doubling on the a file, and then retreating his bishop. And then Karpov wins control over the only open rank. And he won. And Nigel Short describes this as his favorite move in chess, bishop a7. So imagine that Vasily had played this move, bishop a7. And at first, you're kind of like, that's a very strange move. But if you look at it for greater than 2 seconds, well, your next turn is bishop takes a6, not only winning a pawn, but lots and lots and lots of issues are going over here for black. Again, I suspect that he didn't do this because of moves like knight takes g2, king takes g2, knight check, king h2, bishop takes h3, and Vasily said, well, why do I even have to do that? But in fact, those attacks are not threatening. So bishop a7 would have won material. And the funny thing is after, you know, like I'm commentating the game and so forth and so on. After the game was over, I put it in my computer. The first move the computer looks at is bishop a7, white's up by 1.5 pawns. It's like, no. Human players don't play it. Computers say, hey, that's a winner. Knight d5, very, very standard. Bishop b5, bishop b3. Not trading bishops, and the pawns are split. The trade of bishops means the pawns are not split. Okay, so bishop to c6. So why did Vladimir play bishop b5 and now bishop c6? Well, very clearly, had he played bishop c6 immediately, that would have meant that this pawn is attacked. So first bishop b5, and now bishop c6. Okay. Rook a5. So white's just building up behind his superior pawn structure. And at the same time, he's basically saying to black, okay, what are you going to do for a move? Are you going to take my knight and then sacrifice over here with knight takes g2? What are you going to do? Vladimir Kramnik played queen b7. And now this very strange move g3. After the game, it was very interesting to listen to the comments of the players. Both players thought that this was absolutely normal and natural to play the move g3 and to sacrifice the pawn, and really causes black angst. I'm a pawn grubber. I don't believe in giving away nothing. What are you talking about? I thought that the move king h2 was very strong. I like white's position with the idea, like, if it's my move, I would play moves like c4 and g3. In fact, if we go back a move, I actually, the move rook a5 is fine, but I actually also thought the move king h2, preparing g3, was also a very nice position for white. But okay, so these moves get played, g3, black wins a pawn, knight goes back to g5, rook comes over to h1, king goes back. All of these moves were played rather rapidly. I think both players were less on time, but I think Ivanchuk perhaps a little bit more. So Ivanchuk has won a pawn. Ivanchuk has deliberately sacrificed a pawn. But more importantly, look at the position. White's, this bishop is very nice. This bishop is very nice. This knight is better than this knight. This rook is more active than that rook. This queen on e3 effectively attacks more squares than the queen on b7, and so forth and so on. But even having said all of that, remarkably enough, the position is still anybody's game. I think all three results are possible here. I think that white is better, but not by, let's say, any decisive amount. I was f2, f3. Okay, a little bit just, you know, reinforcing this pawn on e4, which reinforces this knight on d5. But this move was a big surprise for me. Bishop takes c6. Bishop c6 takes d5. You know, when you're a pawn up, you're supposed to trade. Yes, sir.
Instead of f3, what's wrong with knight from d to e7?
Yes, knight on d5 to e7 check. That is the whole point of the move f3. White wants to play this move. The problem is that the pawn on e4 is weak, so that after rook takes e7, bishop takes e7, bishop takes e4 check, wins back the rook on the diagonal. So the move f2, f3 is in fact essentially a setup for that move knight e7 check. So bishop takes c6. I wasn't really a big fan of this move. Like, there are other moves in this position that black could entertain, and I still wasn't 100% sure, you know, like how to fully evaluate the position. But okay, bishop takes c6. This isn't a bad idea. And after bishop here, this move, queen c8, also struck me as very strange. In the first place, I'm not 100% sure, well, the knight on g5, I mean, I was always taught centralize your knights, right? And equally, I was taught, you know, centralize your rook, centralize everything. So I thought that the position after knight on e6, knight to e6, pardon me, it's still anybody's game. If you allow black the opportunity to either take this bishop or perhaps to jump to the square d4, okay, you're a pawn up. So I was surprised by this move, queen c8, which I thought was kind of strange. And the move queen b3, I really related to. I like this move a lot from white's point of view. First of all, not only you're putting some very, very serious pressure on the f7 pawn, what I liked was the idea that now I could redeploy this bishop to e3 and capture this knight. Now Vladimir's position really started to sink fast. h5, well, we understand that move. We understand that white wants to play bishop e3 and he doesn't want his pawn on h6 hanging, right? Bishop e3, knight e6, rook h1, d1. Here I think time trouble, nerves, something. Vladimir really, I think, just simply panicked here, and he came up with this move h4, which I think that just, well, kind of just blows the game. Let's put it like that. Blows the game. Okay, well, white's winning back his pawn. Okay, you know, it's sort of like, good for you, you get to win back your pawn, but it doesn't mean that, you know, I should resign or something like this. My problem, what I really want to do, is I do want to play this move knight d4, but I have a problem on f7. So I need to release, I need to cover the pawn on d7. I thought after the move queen d7, or even a move like rook e7, either queen d7 or rook e7, if we see a trade, and on the one hand, I'm kind of happy as black with this exchange, because remember, white's rooks are really kind of dominant. I got this rook on a8's doing nothing. Well, now I got rid of my rook. Okay, so now after something like this, I thought, okay, knight d4, queen comes to a2, and now I've got this issue with rook a8 that I have to deal with. What was I thinking? There was a line of play here. No, sorry, it's not with this line of play. It's with queen on d7. I apologize. We're just going to go back for a moment, queen to d7. And what was this? It was some, now I'm not sure I can remember the line. I was getting some play here. How can I get some play? What was I thinking? There was some line where I was getting some play. Help me out. What am I missing? Help me out. I can't recall. There was some, maybe it's queen d1. Oh boy. Okay, something went wrong. Just a second. Now I've done it wrong. Here. Oh, okay. So it was c6, bishop here. Okay, queen c8. Okay, so right. So now it was this was the line where I think I was asking for knight e6. I apologize. Right. So this line was different because what would you recommend for white after the move knight e6? Any takers? Bishop takes e6. Okay, but after rook takes e6, at some point you might redirect your energies. You might play rook d1, queen e2, and you might win that pawn back. But in that case, I've got a problem with this bishop. With my queen still on b7, I'm thinking that I could play h5 and bishop here. And black's chances of making a draw seem exceptionally reasonable to me. I don't see any reason why black should be especially unhappy about that position. So I apologize. I think it was here where this move queen c8, I think that this was a wasted move. Queen b3, h5, bishop e3. And this is now already where Vladimir is already in trouble because he's not getting the counterplay on the king side as fast as white is playing rook takes a6 and so on. So here I thought Vladimir was in deep trouble. He played h4, which I also thought was wrong. I think I had a different idea here for Vladimir. Not that it's anything great, but I thought that Vladimir should play a very interesting, strange move. I thought Vladimir should play king here. New variation. So what's the idea? The idea is in case white goes for this capture, capture, capture variation, I think it was bishop here. So here, at least I'm trying to create counterplay. My bishop on g7 hasn't been doing anything. So now I'm trying to get my bishop in the game with bishop g7 to h6 and to follow up with the move h5, h4. I thought that this was the way that Vladimir had to go. Instead, he played this move h4. Oops, excuse me. If there's any questions, let me know. G takes h4, queen d8, rook takes a6, and now this move was really surprising because not only does it lose a tempo, but it consigns the rook on c8 to playing the defensive role of the pawn on a6, and it allows this rook on a6 to live. And now with this move rook h1, Vasily basically says, well, I've got an extra defender on the king side, and that guy's not playing. And here, at this point, actually, I think Vasily just played literally perfect. He just shut down black's counterplay. I didn't see anything.
This is really nice, though. Rook a1 and then back to h1.
Yes.
You don't see that too often.
And this. Well, first of all, sorry. After the move b5, the problem from black's point of view, of course, is he would love to take this pawn, but after rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes, check, this rook is actually now playing suddenly an attacking role with this move h5 in the works, not to mention g6 is hanging. So rook here, b6, incredibly powerful passed pawn, c5, trying to rook b1, defending the pawn on b6, bishop f8, queen d5. It's been, it's strange that it just seemed to me that white literally played the whole game basically in black's camp, right? I mean, all of the, I mean, with the single exception of this short-lived excursion to the f4 squares by the black knight, I mean, it's been white's pieces that have always been held forward. And it was like, as you said in this interview, like Vladimir, and especially after the game, Vladimir thought his position was okay. Whereas it just seemed to me that white is like had everything the whole way through. Now it's now it was easy for Ivanchuk. He could calculate the finish. And this move, what you were saying, Ben, that's really nice. It goes rook h1, rook on a1 to h1, rook on h1 to b1, and then back to a1. And he's threatening to play the obvious rook a8, pinning the bishop to the king, followed by bishop takes c5, and it's resigns. Rook d6, rook a8. This was quite easy for Vasily to calculate. Basically, if you capture this pawn, rook takes b6, you've got no defense after the move rook a8 to threats of bishop takes c5, or more simply, rook takes f8 check, king takes f8, and bishop takes c5, winning. So bishop d6, rook a6. Now, I think at this moment, Magnus Carlsen, he had a losing position against Peter Svidler, having made the time control, and he had gone over to look at this game, and you know, how do you say, reassured himself that not even Ivanchuk could blow this, you know, like he'd made the time control. And it's very easy from White's point of view. What White wants to do is just bring his king to the support of the b6 pawn and just bring his king straight up. And it's gone. You can't save this position. And so here Vladimir resigned. This was some tournament. I don't think we're going to see a tournament as exciting and as compelling viewing as this one for many, many years to come.